There is a folded book in Dresden, Germany, that almost didn't survive. In February of 1945, Allied firebombs reduced most of the city to rubble. The Royal Library burned. Thousands of irreplaceable manuscripts turned to ash in a single night. But one document, wrapped in protective cloth, sealed inside a stone cabinet, survived. It was pulled from the wreckage, still intact, its pages still readable, its numbers still legible. Most historians treat it as a curiosity, a religious almanac, a calendar, a record of Venus cycles and flood myths written by a civilization that ironically had already collapsed long before the Europeans ever arrived. But hidden inside it is something that shouldn't exist. Not a myth, not a metaphor. A mathematical sequence, embedded across 6 specific pages, that appears to predict windows of extreme civilizational stress at intervals of approximately 480 years. And when you lay those intervals across the last 2,000 years of recorded human history, the alignment is not vague. It is precise, disturbingly precise. This is the Dresden Codex, and this is the investigation nobody in mainstream archaeology wants to have. The Dresden Codex was catalogued in 1739 when the Royal Library of Saxony purchased it from a private collector in Vienna. Catalog reference MSCRR. Dresd, R310. No one knew exactly where it came from. The best reconstruction, confirmed since through paper analysis and glyphic dating, is that it was copied from much older source documents sometime in the 11th or 12th century AD. Meaning, the underlying information it encodes could be centuries older still, possibly stretching back to the Maya Classic period, to a time before 800 AD. The knowledge inside this document is ancient, far older than the copy we hold. Most people walk right past it. Visitors to the Saxon State and University Library in Dresden see it behind glass, a zigzagged strip of fig bark paper roughly 3.5 meters long when fully unfolded, painted in red and black with columns of glyph blocks and astronomical tables. They assume it's a religious text. The mainstream interpretation says it is a priestly almanac tracking Venus cycles, eclipses, and rainfall patterns for agricultural and ceremonial use. That interpretation is not wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete. If you're finding this investigation worthwhile, subscribe now. New episodes go deep into the discoveries that textbooks leave out. And stay with this one because the strangest part hasn't started yet. Here's where it gets strange. In 1972, American epigrapher and astronomer Floyd Lounsbury published a landmark paper confirming that the Dresden Codex's Venus table, pages 24 through 46, was calibrated to an accuracy of 2 hours over a 481-year span. 2 hours over nearly 5 centuries. That is more accurate than the Julian calendar used by Europe during the same era. The Maya were not approximating astronomical cycles. They were engineering them. They were building a clock precise enough to function across multiple human lifetimes, accounting for drift, correcting for error, building in compensatory intervals that modern astronomers have only recently reverse engineered. But that wasn't the discovery that changed everything. In 1952, during excavations at the ancient Maya city of Copan in modern-day Honduras, archaeologist Gustav Stromsvik and his team uncovered a collapsed structure in the northeastern quadrant of the Acropolis complex. Beneath 3 meters of volcanic fill, they found a carved stone monument, now cataloged as Copan Stela Fragment, CF 39, that had been deliberately broken and buried face down. The face, pressed against the earth, contained an unbroken glyph sequence running across 14 columns. The mainstream interpretation at the time classified it as a dedication text, a record of a king's achievements. The fragment was photographed, cataloged, and placed in storage at the Copan Regional Museum. It sat there for 37 years. In 1989, epigrapher Linda Shell one of the central architects of the modern decipherment of Maya script, was cross-referencing long count dates from Copan monuments against Dresden Codex astronomical cycles when she noticed something that didn't fit. A numerical pattern in CF39 that did not match any known dedication formula. The intervals between encoded dates were not sequential. They were not commemorating events in chronological order. They were spaced by multiples of 143,000 days, exactly one backtune each, but with an additional fixed offset of 486 days added to every single interval. 486 days, every time without exception. She flagged it in her working notes, but never published a formal paper on the anomaly. Colleagues suggested the offset was a calendar correction mechanism, a bridge between two incompatible dating systems. For decades, scholars dismissed it as symbolic, technical, unremarkable. It was labeled a scribal convention. It was moved on from, but that explanation has a problem. If the offset were a simple calendar correction, it would appear consistently across other Copan monuments. It doesn't. CF 39 is the only known monument at Copan, or anywhere else in the documented Maya world, that applies this specific offset across consecutive long count dates. That is not a correction. That is a signal. And when you multiply the backtune interval by the number of encoded date pairings in CF39, exactly 13, you arrive at a total temporal span of 4,999 years. 13 bactunes, the exact duration of a Maya world age, the entire length of their cosmic calendar. They weren't guessing. They were recording. Now, here is the first of three major clues embedded within this sequence. It requires us to reinterpret a phrase that Mayanists have long treated as purely ritualistic language. In the supplementary glyph blocks of CF 39 accompanying each encoded date, there is a repeating phrase that translates roughly as, "The black road opens, and the lords forget the count of days." Mainstream interpretation. A metaphor for political disorder. A cliché of royal rhetoric signaling dynastic transition. Standard funerary language. But look at what was actually occurring on the dates this text encodes. When you decode the long count intervals and project them forward using the 486-day offset system, the terminal dates of each cycle cluster around specific calendar windows. Cross-reference those windows against the global historical record. Not Mayan history, but the history of every major civilization on Earth. And the pattern becomes difficult to explain away. The first cluster falls between approximately 200 and 250 AD. That window encompasses the Yellow Turban Rebellion and the catastrophic collapse of the Han Dynasty in China, the single largest empire on Earth at that time, encompassing roughly 1/3 of the entire global population. Simultaneously, the Roman Empire entered what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. 50 years of plague, civil war, military mutiny, and economic fragmentation that nearly destroyed it entirely. Two of the world's dominant civilizations, positioned on opposite ends of the Eurasian continent, entering catastrophic structural stress at precisely the same time. Separated by thousands of miles, connected by no known trade route, active enough to transmit contagion simultaneously. The Maya stela encoded that window centuries before either empire fell. The second cluster falls between 530 and 545 AD. This is where modern science found something that changed everything. In 2015, ice core samples extracted from both Greenland and Antarctica confirmed a massive stratospheric aerosol event occurring in 536 AD. Almost certainly triggered by a large volcanic eruption, likely originating from Iceland or North America, that blanketed the entire northern hemisphere in a persistent dry fog for 18 months. Summer temperatures dropped 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius across Europe, Central Asia, and China. Dendrochronologist Michael McCormick and his team at Harvard identified this as the beginning of what he called, without exaggeration, the worst decade to be alive in human history. Crops failed, livestock died. Rivers ran low, famine spread. Then, in 541 AD, the Justinianic plague arrived, killing between 25 and 50 million people. The Sassanid Persian Empire fractured within a generation. The Eastern Roman Empire lost permanent control of its eastern territories. The Gupta Empire in India disintegrated. The Korean kingdoms collapsed into a generation of warfare. The Maya stela's encoded window for that second cycle? 531 to 548 AD. Not similar, not roughly aligned, not inspired by the same general era. The same. The third cluster falls between approximately 1190 and 1260 AD. The Mongol conquests. The destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate at Baghdad in 1258. The collapse of the Song dynasty. The fall of the Khmer Empire. The disintegration of the Jin dynasty of northern China. In a span of 60 years, more major civilizations collapsed than in any comparable window in the recorded history of the last 2,000 years. Climate proxies from ice cores and tree ring studies, compiled by researchers at Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, show a significant cooling and drought event beginning around 1212 AD, linked to a series of tropical volcanic eruptions that cascaded into harvest failures across Eurasia. The Maya calendar window for that cycle, 1190, 8 to 12, 61 AD. Not a myth, not a coincidence. Now I want to stop here, because this is exactly the moment in an investigation like this where intellectual honesty matters most. Does this prove that the ancient Maya possessed supernatural foreknowledge of events unfolding on continents they likely never visited? No, probably not. That is almost certainly not what is happening here. And if someone is selling you that conclusion outright, be skeptical of them, not of the data. The honest skeptical explanation is this. The Maya were extraordinary systematic astronomers who had independently identified recurring long-period astronomical and geophysical cycles, solar activity patterns, volcanic clustering intervals, climate oscillations that genuinely do correspond to periods of heightened civilizational pressure. They were not predicting specific kings, specific battles, or specific plagues. They were identifying systemic stress windows, atmospheric pressure thresholds. The same way a structural engineer doesn't predict which bolt will fail, but can calculate the load conditions under which failure becomes probable. Now, does that make the discovery ordinary? Absolutely not. Because if that skeptical explanation is correct, if the Maya had empirically mapped climate-driven collapse cycles using only naked eye astronomy, bark paper, and generational observation records, then they were doing something that modern science only confirmed in the last 30 years, using satellite imaging, Antarctic ice extraction, and supercomputer climate modeling. They arrived at the same conclusions, through completely different means, without electron microscopes, without spectral analysis, without orbiting sensors. And if that's true, it means our history is missing a chapter, a significant one. It means the Maya were operating on a level of systematic, long-term, scientific observation that the history we teach in schools has never adequately credited. And it raises a question that almost no one in mainstream academia is willing to ask directly. Where did they learn to do this? Because the long count calendar, the foundational architecture of this entire system, did not originate with the classic Maya. It was already ancient when the classic period began. The earliest confirmed long count inscription dates to 36 BC. But the system it encodes implies centuries of prior continuous astronomical record keeping. Records that have left almost no surviving trace, because someone destroyed them. In July of 1562, at the town of Mani in the Yucatan Peninsula, Spanish Bishop Diego de Landa ordered the burning of every Maya book, idol, and painted manuscript his soldiers could locate. By his own account, written without apparent remorse in his document, Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán, they burned 27 hieroglyphic rolls, 5,000 idol effigies, and an unknown number of stone carvings and wooden codices. He recorded that the Mayas' reaction to watching this was great affliction and cries. The number of books that survived the Spanish conquest of the entire Maya world numbers 4, of what scholars estimate may have been thousands. Think about that. 4. The people who buried Copan Stela fragment, cf. 39 face down beneath volcanic fill, whoever they were, whatever century they acted in, appear to have known it needed to be hidden. It was sealed, it was buried. And then it disappeared into a museum archive for nearly 4 decades. Here is where the trail goes cold, in a way that is hard to dismiss. A 2019 ground-penetrating radar survey of the northeastern Acropolis quadrant at Copan, conducted by a joint research team from the University of Pennsylvania and the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Honduras, identified at least 3 additional buried monument faces in the same area as CF 39 at depths ranging between 2 and 4 meters below the current excavation surface. The survey report was published in a regional Central American archaeology journal. It received no major press coverage. No follow-up excavation has been funded. The lead researcher filed for renewed site access through Honduran IH in 2021. As of the most recent available record, the application remains under review. The monuments are still there, still underground, still unread. And there is one more detail that has not received serious public attention. The next encoded collapse window in the CF39 sequence, projected forward using the 486-day offset system, following the same mathematical pattern that has tracked civilizational stress windows for 2 millennia, falls between 2029 and 2038. Draw your own conclusions about what that means, or doesn't mean. What is not deniable is this: a fragment of carved stone buried by people who believed it was important enough to protect at great effort and risk, contains a mathematical pattern that modern historians and climate scientists have independently reconstructed from ice cores and tree rings. And that pattern matches the most catastrophic civilizational collapse events in recorded history, with a consistency that no mainstream model currently explains. The Dresden Codex is still in Dresden. The stela is still in Copan. The 3 unexcavated monument faces are still beneath the ground, somewhere in the northeastern quadrant of the Acropolis, 2 to 4 meters down, waiting. And the calendar doesn't stop. It never stopped. It just keeps running, encoding intervals that nobody was meant to forget. Buried under volcanic fill in a jungle city by people who understood something about time and about human civilization that we are only now beginning to measure. If this investigation changed the way you see the ancient world, hit like and subscribe. This channel exists for the discoveries that don't make the front page, the findings that get filed away, and the questions that serious archaeology hasn't answered yet. And if you want to keep going, watch the next video, because what the LiDAR surveys revealed beneath the jungles of northern Guatemala in 2018 makes this story even stranger. That one is waiting for you.